imagine for a second, you know exactly what your customer wants to buy. Like you have the AI to serve it to them perfectly. You have their entire historical context mapped out, and the physical inventory is literally sitting in a warehouse ready to ship.
Right. The absolute dream scenario for any business.
Exactly. But then you realize that actually pushing the button to show them that specific hyper-personalized recommendation, that single action, is going to cost your company over $5,000 in legal and compliance paperwork every single time.
And we are not talking about, $5,000 in some vague theoretical overhead. We are talking about hard operational cash bleeding out of the enterprise simply because that specific customer happens to live in a different legal jurisdiction than where your data servers are physically located.
Which is just, it's a staggering reality for global enterprises today. So welcome to today's Innovation Unpacked Deep Dive. Look, the mission for this deep dive is ambitious because we are unpacking a highly structured, incredibly dense manifesto on what's being called sovereign personalization.
Yeah, it's a brilliant piece of work.
It really is. It was originally penned by Mike Boysen, and for the rest of our time together, we're just going to refer to this as the venture-proof analysis to keep things simple. And the core thesis here completely shatters how we currently build digital architecture.
Completely tears it down to the studs.
Right. We are going to explore how global companies are bleeding billions, specifically $46.2 billion in stranded strategic value, because they are trapped in this balkanized world of data protectionism. They are trying to solve a brutal physics problem using basically legal Word documents.
Which never works.
Yeah.
The tension here is deeply structural. Think about it. For the last 10, maybe 15 years, the absolute gold standard for any digital architect, any chief data officer or CMO was centralized aggregation.
Building the ultimate brain.
Exactly. The goal was to build a massive singular data lake. You take every click, every hover, every transaction, every customer service chat log from all over the planet, and you vacuum it into one centralized location.
Like a massive AWS cluster sitting in US East.
Yeah, US East is the classic example. And you do this so your global AI models can look at everything all at once and find patterns.
Which, to be fair, was an elegant vision. Think about the beauty of that paradigm for a second. You have one unified version of the truth. Your AI can look at the entire global data set simultaneously.
Oh, from an engineering perspective, it's beautiful.
Right. It notices that a buyer in Frankfurt is exhibiting the exact same micro-behaviors as a buyer in Tokyo, and it instantly personalizes the interface for both of them. It genuinely felt like we had conquered geography.
Well, we hadn't conquered geography, we just, we temporarily ignored it. Because what you are describing there is what the dossier calls the analogy trap.
The analogy trap. Break that down for us.
So enterprises looked at the physical balkanization of the internet, these strict, localized mandates popping up everywhere, like GDPR in Europe or PIPL in China. And they treated these laws as if they were just, annoying tax codes.
Like a bureaucratic hurdle.
Exactly. They assumed their centralized data lake was structurally sound, and that navigating global privacy laws was merely a legal documentation problem. They relied on what we call paper compliance.
Ah, the standard contractual clauses. The famous SCCs.
Yes, the SCCs. Companies essentially believed that data sovereignty was a negotiation. They thought, hey, if we get the right signatures from our vendors, if we fill out the massive privacy consent forms, if we have a truly robust terms of service agreement, we can just keep sucking all this raw, personally identifiable information, PII, right into our centralized American data lakes.
They assumed the legal paperwork functioned as this, magic shield protecting their digital architecture.
But a contract doesn't change the physical location of a server. It's if I build a house right on top of a major fault line and I pay a structural engineer to sign a piece of paper saying the house is perfectly safe, that paper doesn't actually stop the tectonic plates from shifting.
No, it definitely doesn't. And those plates are shifting violently right now. The venture-proof analysis points to this one defining moment that proved this analogy trap is a fatal error. And that was Ireland's Data Protection Commission hitting Meta with a 1.2 billion euro fine.
Billion. With a B.
Yeah, a massive wake-up call.
And the justification for that fine is what keeps enterprise architects awake at night, honestly.
Yeah.
Meta was fined for continuous, unlawful EU to US data transfers. The regulators established the hard legal precedent that paper contracts, those beloved SECs, are completely and utterly inadequate if foreign intelligence laws like FISA in the U.S. can legally bypass them.
Right, because a piece of paper cannot stop a federal subpoena.
Exactly. Therefore, the European regulators declare that you absolutely must have localized technical barriers. You can't just promise not to look at the data. You have to physically guarantee it.
So the ground just fundamentally dropped out from underneath the centralized model. But you look around today and enterprises are in total denial about this. I mean, think about the sunk cost involved here.
It's massive.
You have Fortune 500 companies that have spent half a decade and literally hundreds of millions of dollars building these pristine centralized data lakes. They aren't just going to turn them off.
Which leads to arguably the most revealing anecdote in the whole dossier.
Mm-hmm.
There is this story of a chief data officer who finally realizes the centralized model is dead. They look at the Metafine and realize they're holding a massive regulatory time bomb.
Yeah, the CDO story, I love this one.
So this CDO goes to the chief financial officer and tries to get the legacy US East data lake written off so they can get the budget to build something localized and compliant.
And the CFO, who is staring down a 9-figure sunk cost on this data lake, completely stonewalls them. The CFO just straight up refuses to acknowledge that the architecture is deprecated.
Totally stonewalls them. So the CDO had to resort to actual psychological warfare to get their point across. They literally built a heat map of all these conflicting global jurisdictions, printed out a threat model, calculating their own potential 1.2 billion euro regulatory fine, and taped it directly to the CFO's computer monitor.
I mean, just picture that level of desperation.
Right. Just to force the business side to understand that this isn't a fun, legal hypothetical anymore. This is a hard mechanical constraint.
When you have executives taping existential financial threats to each other's monitors, you know the paradigm is fundamentally broken. But, human nature is stubborn. Because these CFOs refused to write off the centralized lake, they demanded a compromise instead.
Which is the worst thing they could do.
Exactly. They told their architects, look, don't destroy the data lake, just build a wall around it, go buy whatever compliance tools you need to make it legal. And that mandate birthed what the venture-proof analysis brilliantly calls sovereign theater.
Sovereign theater. It is the perfect term for it because it is an elaborate, incredibly expensive illusion. The pragmatist in me looks at how companies are attempting to solve this today, and it is just maddening to watch.
Walk us through what they're actually doing.
Okay, here's what they do. They go to their major cloud provider and say, hey, the regulators are mad at us. We need sovereign cloud storage. So they spin up these new servers physically located in Frankfurt or Paris, paying a massive premium, usually a 10 to 30% markup, just to have the hard drives geographically anchored in Europe.
And on a whiteboard, that looks like a huge victory. You point to the box on the architecture chart and say, look, the data is at rest in the EU. We are compliant. Pat on the back.
But they are completely ignoring the network topology. The storage is just the hard drive. The control planes managing that storage are still entirely global. The identity and access management who actually gets to log into that European database is still routed through a central server in Virginia.
Oh, wow.
The system telemetry, the security monitoring, the API gateways, they all constantly phone home to the central brain in the US.
It's basically like building an impenetrable titanium bank vault in Germany, but keeping the security cameras and the electronic lock system wired directly to a control room in New York. If the New York control room gets compromised or slapped with a subpoena, the vault in Germany is wide open.
That is the perfect analogy. The storage is regional, but the network leaks like a sieve. They relocated the aesthetic of liability without eliminating the actual mechanical reality of it. And the human toll this takes on the internal compliance teams is horrific. We really need to talk about the job map outlined in the dossier for a data sovereignty architect today.
Oh, it's a total nightmare. Because to maintain this illusion of control, these poor architects have to prove to the regulators that they know exactly where every single piece of customer data is flowing at all times.
And how do they track it? They aren't using automated cryptographic enforcement. They're using manual spreadsheets.
Spreadsheets. For global data flows.
Yes. They are drawing lines in lucid charts. They are relying on tribal knowledge. An architect literally has to ping a senior engineer on Slack and ask, hey, Does that legacy marketing API from 3 years ago still pull French customer emails into the US Analytics dashboard?
Which brings up that crazy enterprise audit the analysis details, because that exposes the dark reality of this spreadsheet method. During a deep dive audit, one of these enterprises found 47 undocumented shadow flows.
47 rogue data pipelines.
Yeah.
Just completely off the books.
Imagine a marketing team back in, say, 2019, setting up a quick automated extract to analyze an email campaign. They spin up a third-party SaaS tool, pipe European user data over to a US server, get their insights for the week, and then just move on to another project. But the pipeline never gets turned off.
Never.
It just sits there for years, blindly blasting PII across sovereign borders every single night, completely undocumented by the compliance team.
And the fundamental flaw with relying on humans and spreadsheets to track this is that the drift rate of these topology maps is basically 100%. The very second an architect hits save on their master compliance spreadsheet, it is already outdated.
Because the business keeps moving.
Exactly.
Right.
Because while they were typing, some developer in another time zone just spun up a brand new SaaS integration, instantly creating a new cross-border data flow that isn't on the map.
It is rolling a boulder up a hill, only the hill is made of quicksand. And honestly, this perfectly explains the sudden growth stall of the incumbent privacy tech giants.
Yeah, the market data here is fascinating.
The venture-proof analysis pulls the historical market data on companies like OneTrust, which is the massive market leader in privacy compliance. In 2022, OneTrust was an absolute rocket ship. They were hitting 100% year-over-year growth. They were the undisputed darling of the compliance world because every single company needed their software to generate consent receipts and manage those annoying cookie banners.
Right. They built an incredibly successful business, optimizing for the paper compliance era. But then we look at the data for 2024. That 100% growth rate plummets to a 7.76% stall. They hit an absolute brick wall.
Wait, so you're saying the entire privacy tech industry basically built the wrong ruler?
That's exactly what I'm saying. They optimized for the legal loophole. They built beautifully designed dashboards to manage privacy policies, track standard contractual clauses, and document data flows after the fact. But the regulators, empowered by that 1.2 billion euro meta fine, they stopped caring about the documentation.
They saw right through the theater.
Yes, they demanded technical enforcement at the network edge. They don't want a nice PDF receipt saying you promise not to misuse the data. They want a cryptographic guarantee that the data physically cannot leave the jurisdiction.
You just can't solve the physics problem with a better clipboard. But these companies are still trying. And the financial hemorrhage caused by this stubbornness is almost unbelievable.
If the manual, paper-based way is failing this badly, what is it actually costing us?
Well, the dossier calculates what it calls the inefficiency index, which finally puts a hard dollar amount on this sovereign theater. And the math is wild.
This is where we have to slow down and really dissect the numbers, because this index is the anchor for everything that follows in the manifesto. The dossier isolates a single cross-jurisdictional personalization execution.
Okay, let's define what that is for you listening, just to make it concrete. Say you have a global e-commerce platform. A customer sitting in Paris visits your site. Your central AI, which is sitting in a server in the US, wants to look at their past purchase history, compare it to global trends, and instantly recommend a highly specific product. That microsecond decision, that is a cross-jurisdictional personalization execution.
Right. And to manually reconcile that single microsecond decision compliantly under the current sovereign theater model, it costs an enterprise $5,001.91.
$5,000 to serve one personalized recommendation. And the immediate reaction from anyone hearing that is, well, that's impossible. Compute isn't that expensive. But it's not the compute at all.
Barely any of it is compute or internal labor. The dossier breaks it down clearly. Out of that $5,000, only about $40 is internal engineering labor.
Wow.
The remaining $4,958 is pure bureaucratic bloat. It is external verification. It is paying massive third-party auditing firms. It is the cost of conducting transfer impact assessments, TIAs, which are these massive, tedious legal reviews required every time data crosses a border. It is the manual reconciliation overhead of highly paid compliance officers reviewing flagged edge cases all day.
You are literally applying human speed bureaucracy to machine speed events. It's insane.
And then the venture-proof analysis reveals the alternative. It establishes the physics floor. If you remove the humans, strip out all the paper compliance, and use automated cryptographic execution at the network edge, which we will explain the mechanics of in a moment, the irreducible structural cost of that exact same personalization decision is $18.81.
$5,000 down to 18 bucks. That is a 266x efficiency multiplier. The gap between those two numbers is the literal cost of living in denial. Now, scale that single transaction up to an enterprise level. The dossier models a typical multinational doing roughly 869,560 of these cross-border personalization executions a year, operating across 40 different global markets.
And the math is brutal. That translates to $4.3 billion in wasted operating expenses annually. Pure administrative waste.
But that's just the OpEx waste, right? We haven't even talked about the opportunity cost. Because this manual, lawyer-heavy process is so bloated and slow, the system introduces massive latency. When the AI wants to personalize an offer, but the system has to check 5 different compliance databases to ensure it's legal first, the clock is ticking, the customer is waiting for the web page to load.
In a digital commerce, latency is death. We all
Yeah.
know this. If a page takes more than a few seconds, the user bounces.
Exactly. The dossier notes that 35% of these personalization moments are simply abandoned due to latency. The compliance check takes too long, the system times out, and the website just falls back to serving a generic, unpersonalized experience. That 35% abandonment rate represents a $38 billion loss in potential transaction value.
It is staggering. You add the $4.3 billion in OpEx waste to the $38 billion in lost revenue, and you arrive at $46.2 billion in total stranded strategic value every single year. That is the true cost of sovereign theater.
When a board of directors sees $46 billion evaporating like that, panic sets in. They demand a pathway out. The dossier outlines 3 potential pathways an enterprise can take when confronted with this math. And this is where we have to be incredibly rigorous, because most companies panic and choose the wrong path.
Yeah, let's dissect them. Path A is what the analysis calls persona expansion. This is basically the incumbent vendor approach. The company realizes their compliance process is broken, so they just buy more modules from their current vendor. They take the exact same flawed manual data mapping process and just sell it sideways to different departments.
Hey, the privacy team's spreadsheets aren't working. Let's force the marketing and security teams to use them too. I mean, it's a shallow, unscalable response. You are just exporting your broken architecture into new silos. It solves nothing mechanically.
Which naturally leads companies to Path B, which is vastly more dangerous because it actually looks like a solution to the board. Path B is the efficiency dividend.
Now, I have to admit, when I first read about Path B, it made intuitive sense to me. The logic is, okay, the manual bureaucracy is costing us $4,958 per transaction. Let's use AI and automation to speed up the bureaucracy.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. You automate the data subject access requests. You buy automated connector tools to map the shadow flows faster. You make the centralized system cheaper to operate.
I'm going to stop you right there, because Path B is a total mathematical trap. It is an illusion. And the venture-proof analysis proves it by introducing the Jevons paradox.
Okay, break that down, because I know Jevons goes back to, what, the 19th century?
Yes. William Stanley Jevons was a 19th century economist who studied coal consumption. In 1865, the steam engine was vastly improved to use coal much more efficiently. Now, the logical assumption at the time was that because engines were more efficient, the country would consume less coal overall.
But the exact opposite happened.
Dramatically the opposite. Because steam power became cheaper and more efficient, it suddenly became profitable to use steam engines in dozens of new industries that couldn't afford them before. The demand for steam engines skyrocketed, and the total consumption of coal exploded. That is the Jevons paradox. Increasing the efficiency of a resource actually increases the overall consumption of that resource.
And the dossier applies this directly to enterprise data architecture.
Precisely. They calculate the Jevons elasticity factor for cross-border personalization at 1.38.
Wait, so if I use Path B automation to cut my compliance cost per transaction by 50%?
The business demand for those transactions will instantly grow by 69%. The marketing team sees that the compliance bottleneck is slightly wider, so they just shove twice as many personalization requests through the pipeline. Your cost savings are instantly devoured by the massive surge in volume.
Wow. So the volume explodes and the automation breaks down anyway, because you inevitably slam right into the very next human bottleneck. You might have automated the initial data mapping, but those automated systems still flag complex edge cases.
Exactly.
So now your senior compliance reviewers, who are the most expensive humans in the entire loop, are drowning in a 69% increase of edge case alerts that require manual legal sign-off.
As the analysis states, and this is the quote that honestly should be framed on every CDO's wall right now, elasticity without inversion is a treadmill, not a dividend. If your underlying architecture is broken, automating it just means you run faster to bleed money at the exact same rate.
It is a devastating critique of the entire privacy tech industry. If path B is just a treadmill and you cannot mathematically optimize a centralized data lake to ever reach that $18 physics floor, you are forced into an uncomfortable realization.
You have to abandon the central lake entirely. It's the only way out.
Which brings us to the core conceptual breakthrough of the manifesto. Path C, the disruptive vision. We have to completely change the physics, because the entire problem stems from the premise that the data must travel to the brain. We suck all the raw, localized PII out of Europe or Asia and drag it over the ocean to a central model in the US.
Path C flips the polarity entirely. You leave the data exactly where it is, and you send the brain to the data. It is the fundamental principle of aggregation over replication.
Let me try a metaphor to visualize this, because it's a massive paradigm shift for people used to the old way. Under the old centralized model, imagine you are a king trying to understand the cultural mood of your entire country. To do this, you force every single citizen to mail their deeply private, physical diary to a massive central library in the capital city. The central librarian reads all the diaries to find patterns.
Which is a logistical nightmare. I mean, the mail trucks are getting hijacked, the citizens are terrified of a privacy breach, and the regional governors are fining the library 1.2 billion euros for unauthorized diary transport.
Exactly. Path C is the inversion. In the new model, the diaries never leave the citizens' homes. They stay locked in the desk. Instead, the central library sends a trusted, highly trained scholar to each individual town. The scholar sits in a secure local room, reads the diaries of that specific town, and learns from them. But here is the critical part. The scholar is legally and physically barred from taking the diaries or even writing down specific quotes.
They can only extract the abstract mathematical patterns.
Right. The scholar can only mail back abstract lessons learned. They mail a letter to the capital saying, hey, people in this town are leaning 12% more toward buying winter coats this year. They send back the insight, never the raw data.
Now look, as an analogy, that paints a really nice picture. But I want to pull this down to earth, because the mechanical reality of how that scholar actually operates is where the skepticism usually hits. A lot of visionaries talk about decentralized AI, but the engineering nuts and bolts are brutal. The technology driving this is fundamentally a federated learning spine. We really need to explain the actual mechanics of how this works.
Absolutely. Let's get into the weeds. How does the federated learning spine replace the centralized feature store?
Okay, under the old model, a raw click, say, a user in Paris clicking on a red pair of shoes, is transmitted as a raw string of text straight to the US database. In the federated model, you deploy localized compute nodes deep inside the sovereign jurisdiction. The Paris node receives that raw click. The node computes the embeddings locally.
Embeddings being the mathematical representation of that user's intent.
Exactly. It turns the human behavior into a high-dimensional mathematical vector. The raw record, the actual PII, terminates at that local node. It never crosses a border. What does cross the border back to the central spine is what they call an encrypted differentially private gradient delta.
Okay. Differentially private gradient delta is a lot of syllables. Let's translate that for the marketer listening who isn't a machine learning engineer.
Fair enough. A gradient delta is just the mathematical adjustment to the overarching AI model. It's the scholar's insight from your analogy. The local node sends a tiny file saying, hey, central brain, based on what I just saw in Paris, you need to adjust your algorithmic rates for red shoes by 0.002.
But wait, if I'm a clever hacker or even a hostile foreign regulator, couldn't I just intercept that mathematical adjustment and reverse engineer it? Like, if the adjustment is highly specific, couldn't I deduce that Pierre in Paris just bought those red shoes?
That is the exact vulnerability, which is why the protocol introduces differential privacy. Before the local node sends the gradient delta across the border, it injects a calculated amount of cryptographic noise into the math. It slightly blurs the adjustment. It adds just enough randomness so that it is mathematically impossible to reverse engineer the gradient back to a specific individual's action, but not so much noise that the central model loses the overarching trend.
So the scholar lies just a little bit.
Precisely. They obscure the individual to protect the trend. And this architectural shift completely obliterates the need for arguably the most dangerous, highly audited piece of legacy technology in the entire enterprise, the master reconciliation table.
The golden record. I mean, every company has spent millions trying to build the perfect golden record.
And the golden record is a massive liability. It's a central database attempting to perfectly map a single human's identity across 40 different global jurisdictions. It is a giant honeypot for hackers and a massive target for regulators. In Path C, the golden record simply dies. It is replaced by ad hoc identity-linked tokens.
How do those function mechanically? Because you still need to know who the user is for a second, right?
You do. So when a cross-border session is active, say that user in Paris is trying to access their global loyalty points from an American server, the system doesn't ping a master database. Instead, the localized node in the central spine negotiate a temporary cryptographic token. They use this token to resolve the identity just for the duration of that specific transaction. And the millisecond the transaction is complete,
The token just evaporates.
it is entirely destroyed. The enterprise never actually owns a permanent cross-border link. If an EU regulator kicks down the door tomorrow and says, "Show us your global database tracking the movement of our citizens," the enterprise can honestly say, "We literally do not possess it. You cannot audit a topology that doesn't exist at rest."
I find that incredibly elegant, and it totally reshapes the infrastructure costs through what the manifesto calls just-in-time sovereign provisioning. Because remember sovereign theater, companies are paying a 30% markup to rent massive server farms in Frankfurt that just sit idle 80% of the time, just so they have a compliant vault ready when they need it.
It's a terrible, terrible use of capital expenditure.
Totally. But under the federated architecture, you aren't running idle data lakes in 40 countries. When that user in Paris logs in, the architecture spins up an ephemeral microcontainer right there in the local sovereign cloud. It executes the personalization embedding, generates the temporary token, passes the differentially private gradient delta, and then it just kills the container. The infrastructure only exists for the exact duration of the legal necessity.
It converts a bloated fixed capital expenditure into a microscopic marginal operating expense. But, from a pragmatic standpoint, the real genius of this architecture isn't just the cost savings. It is how it forcibly shifts legal liability. The dossier details the use of jurisdictional veto toggles backed by zero-knowledge proofs.
Zero-knowledge proofs are one of those cryptographic concepts that just feel like magic. I always use the bouncer analogy to explain it. A bouncer at a bar needs to know if you are over 21. Under the old model, you hand the bouncer your physical driver's license. They see your full name, your home address, your organ donor status, and your exact birth date. You overshared a massive amount of data just to prove a simple binary fact.
Right. It's vastly inefficient.
A zero-knowledge proof is like having a digital wallet that interfaces with the bouncer's scanner. The scanner asks the wallet, is this person over 21? The wallet performs a cryptographic math problem that can only be solved if the underlying birth date is valid and spits back a mathematical proof. The bouncer scanner verifies the proof and turns green. The bouncer never saw your name, address, or birth date. They possess zero knowledge about you other than the mathematically verified fact that you are of legal age.
That is a solid baseline. But let's apply it directly to the enterprise architecture, because it goes way deeper than just checking an ID. It's about attestation and shifting the burden of proof. Under the legacy model, the enterprise had to grade its own homework. If a regulator asked, "Hey, did any raw PII leave Germany today?" the enterprise would produce its own internal logs and say, "We'll promise it didn't."
Which, as we established earlier with the 47 shadow flows, is very often a lie.
Exactly. But the federated model uses third-party key externalization. The enterprise building the personalization engine doesn't actually hold the proving keys that attest to data residency. The local jurisdiction's auditor, or a trusted regional third party, holds those keys. The architecture forces a cryptographic handshake before a single parameter is allowed to move across the border. If the zero-knowledge proof fails, the local node physically cannot transmit the data. The protocol won't let it.
So it structurally enforces the law right at the protocol layer.
Yes. The liability is shifted away from the chief data officer's error-prone spreadsheets and onto the unbendable math of the protocol itself.
It is a breathtaking vision for the future. But I know you. You are listening to all this whiteboard elegance, you are looking at the ephemeral containers and the zero-knowledge proofs, and you are hunting for the friction, because shifting paradigms is never this clean in the real world.
I am hunting for the friction because it sounds incredible in a vacuum. But does a federated agentic network actually survive contact with reality? What happens to the AI model's accuracy when you chop the global dataset into 40 localized silos?
Which is the exact right critique, and the architects behind this movement know it. That is why they don't just flip a switch and roll this out globally on day one. They have to prove the physics first. The venture-proof analysis calls this the Wizard of Oz phase, or minimum viable proof, the MVPR.
And I deeply respect their methodology here, because you don't test a system like this in a friendly, unregulated market. You don't pilot it in Texas. You do a stealth pilot in the absolute harshest regulatory regimes you operate in. You take this experimental architecture straight into the teeth of the EU's GDPR or China's PIPL.
You run it right in the crucible. And before you even build the automated software pipelines, you manually simulate the parameter aggregation. You literally have engineers manually moving the gradient deltas just to see if the math holds up. And the gate criteria they establish for this pilot are absolutely unforgiving.
Let's examine the specific metrics from the dossier, because this is where theory meets consequence. To pass the stealth pilot, the federated model must achieve a 15% personalization lift with zero raw data egress. Not a single row of PII can leave the jurisdiction. Furthermore, the model's accuracy must remain within 5% of the centralized baseline.
Meaning the federated model has to be almost as smart as the highly illegal centralized data lake.
And the kicker, latency must not increase by more than 250 milliseconds. If the cryptographic handshakes slow the web page down by a third of a second, you kill the project.
It's a brutal gauntlet. And this leads us to the most fascinating section of the dossier, titled The Hostile Tribunal. The authors essentially put their own architecture on trial. And the most dangerous charge leveled against PAPC is the Federal Learning Accuracy Tax.
This is charge 2, and it is a massive, mathematically valid concern. The tribunal points out the stark reality of non-IID data.
Non-independent and identically distributed data. Explain why that breaks the model.
It means the real world is incredibly lumpy. It is not uniform at all. If you have a massive homogeneous market like the United States, your local compute node has tens of millions of data points to learn from. It can generate highly accurate gradient deltas. But what about the smaller markets?
Right. What if you are running a localized sovereign node in Singapore or a smaller EU member state like Latvia?
Exactly. The localized sample size in Latvia lacks the statistical mass to support high-dimensional personalization. The AI doesn't have enough varied examples to confidently learn the patterns, so the signal getting computed at the local node is inherently weak to begin with.
And then you are forced to add the differential privacy noise on top of it.
Yes. The model in Latvia is already struggling with a small data set, and then the protocol injects cryptographic noise into the gradient delta to ensure privacy before it crosses the border. The tribunal correctly argues that the combination of small sample sizes and mandatory cryptographic noise will degrade the signal-to-noise ratio so severely that the AI essentially starts hallucinating. The performance gap will blow right past that 5% tolerance. The recommendations will become totally useless, and the CMO will just abandon the federated spine to go back to dumb, generic, localized marketing.
It is a razor-sharp critique. But the defense against this charge is exactly why I'm so optimistic about the transition. First, the architecture combats non-IID degradation by prioritizing local accuracy loops before federating the insights globally. But more importantly, you have to look at the massive financial padding this inversion creates.
The efficiency dividend.
Yes. Remember the physics floor from earlier? You are taking the cost of a cross-border execution from $5,000 down to $18. You are saving $4.3 billion in operational waste. On top of that, by removing the human-in-the-loop latency, you are reclaiming the 35% of transactions that used to time out. You are unlocking $38 billion in stranded revenue.
So you basically use the massive capital efficiency to fund the R&D.
Exactly. You have a massive war chest of reclaimed operating expense to continually refine the models. If the node in Latvia is struggling with small data, you can afford to run vastly more training epochs on that local node. You can afford to deploy hyper-advanced, specialized edge compute hardware to that specific region because you aren't paying an external auditing firm $5,000 every single time a decision is made. The brutal physics of the cost structure give you the financial breathing room to solve the accuracy gap over time.
That logic holds, assuming you can actually get the board of directors to fund the architectural transition in the first place. You still have to convince the CFO to write off the old lake and invest in the federated spine.
Which is the ultimate institutional hurdle. And the venture-proof analysis points out a crucial failure state here. You cannot prove the value of this new architecture to a board of directors using legacy compliance metrics.
No, if you walk into a boardroom and try to justify a massive infrastructure overhaul by talking about reducing DOS or fulfillment times or optimizing consent receipt volumes, the CFO's eyes will just glaze over. They don't care about compliance metrics. They care about revenue.
You need a brand new North Star. You need a metric that inextricably links regulatory compliance directly to top-line growth. And that brings us to the introduction of SPY.
Sovereign personalization yield.
Let's break with SPY, because this single metric has the power to change the trajectory of the entire enterprise software field.
The dossier defines sovereign personalization yield as the percentage of cross-jurisdictional, personalization-eligible customer interactions that actually get delivered compliantly without falling back to a generic experience or timing out.
It is a brilliant intersection of priorities. Look at the current state of the enterprise. You have two massive executive powers constantly at war with each other. On one side, you have the Chief Information Security Officer, the CISO. Their entire job description, their entire bonus structure is based on blocking risk. They want to shut down data flows, put up massive firewalls, and basically just say no.
And on the other side, you have the Chief Marketing Officer, the CMO. Their bonus is strictly tied to driving conversion and average order value. They want to personalize absolutely everything, which requires moving as much data as possible, as fast as possible.
They are fundamentally misaligned because they operate in structurally separate silos with completely separate metrics. The CISO buys risk management tools to track vault coverage, policy verdicts, and blocked threats. The CMO buys platforms like Salesforce or Adobe to track click-through rates and revenue uplift.
And neither side measures the moments that fall into the abyss between them.
The sovereign tax.
Exactly. When the CISO's automated compliance system blocks a personalization event because it detects a residency violation, that event is silently dropped. The CMO's dashboard doesn't say blocked by compliance, it just registers a lower overall conversion rate for the quarter. Meanwhile, the CISO's dashboard registers a successful block and they pat themselves on the back. The company just lost a sale, and both executives think they are doing a great job.
SPY finally puts a hard, trackable dollar value on that exact friction. It bridges the gap. By measuring the yield of successful compliant personalizations against the total attempts, it proves to the board that the architecture is the compliance, and the compliance is the revenue. If your SPY is 60%, you know exactly how much money you are leaving on the table due to structural latency and balkanization.
And once you deploy this federated architecture to optimize SPY, you create what the analysis calls an unrippable moat. Now, I want to scrutinize this because moat is a buzzword that gets thrown around way too easily in tech. Usually it just means, oh, we have a high switching cost. But the moat described here is deeply structural.
It is deeply structural. Think about how Path C fundamentally alters the enterprise ecosystem. You aren't just installing another SaaS tool that sits on top of your existing database. You are embedding these localized compute nodes directly into the specific sovereign jurisdictions.
You are physically entangling your architecture with the local geography.
Yes. And because the local nodes retain ownership of the raw data signal, and the central federated spine only receives the abstract gradient deltas, you achieve a massive breakthrough. You decouple the model's intellectual property from raw record custodianship.
This is a critical point. The local data stewards, like the regional managers in France or Japan, effectively gain equity in the global AI model.
They do. They become intelligence providers. They get a mathematically verifiable royalty stream of insight. Their local market feeds encrypted intelligence into the global brain without ever risking their own citizens' privacy, and in return, they receive the benefit of the global model's overarching wisdom.
You build an interdependent graph of intelligence. And once that dependency graph is established, ripping out this platform becomes politically and mechanically impossible.
The dossier calls it an institutional semantic amputation. Imagine a new CTO comes in 3 years later and says, hey, I don't like this federated spine, let's rip it out and go back to a centralized lake. To do that, they would have to go to the regional managers and regulators in 40 different countries and say, hey, we are going to stop using the mathematically secure, zero-knowledge cryptographic protocol, and we are going to go back to routing raw PII through manual spreadsheets to a server in Virginia.
No chief financial officer or chief legal officer on Earth will ever sign off on that regression. The regulatory switching costs are catastrophic. The architecture becomes permanent.
Which connects this massive global enterprise problem directly back to you, the listener. Whether you are a senior enterprise architect managing a sprawling legacy SaaS stack, or you are a founder sitting in a garage building an AI startup on day one, the fundamental lesson of this dossier is inescapable. You cannot solve a physics problem, the secure aggregation of behavioral data across closed borders, with a legal tool.
Paper compliance is dead. The SCCs are dead. The architecture is the compliance. If your business model requires raw PII to move across a sovereign border to generate its core value, your business model is structurally obsolete. It is a skyscraper built on a sinkhole.
Which leads us to a final, highly speculative but incredibly provocative thought from the venture-proof analysis. It's a hunch about the ultimate endgame of this balkanization. They call it the compute sovereignty Cold War.
This is the macroeconomic scenario that takes everything we've discussed and dials it up to an existential threat level.
Think about the geopolitical trajectory we are on right now. Currently, nation-states are entirely focused on data sovereignty. They want the hard drives located strictly inside their borders. But what happens when regulators in China or the European Union bloc wake up and realize that data sovereignty isn't enough?
Because they realize the models themselves are the actual power.
Exactly. What if they mandate that all local resident-facing AI models, the models determining credit scores, healthcare triage, and consumer behavior, must be trained only on government-subsidized, localized GPU clusters?
They look at the current landscape and realize their entire digital economy is entirely dependent on U.S.-controlled hyperscalers. They rely on AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure. They view that dependency not just as an economic weakness, but as an active national security threat.
So they drop the hammer. They permanently bifurcate the hardware market. They pass laws stating that critical, localized AI cannot be run on American silicon, hosted by an American corporation, regardless of where the server is physically sitting. They demand true compute sovereignty, blocking the U.S. hyperscalers entirely for critical workloads.
If we reach that level of hardware balkanization, the federated architecture we've been debating isn't just a clever, cost-saving measure to optimize your operating expense. It becomes the only legally and physically functional way to operate a global business on the internet.
It forces every multinational corporation into a multi-tenant, federated protocol just to survive. The central brain is completely outlawed. The ground isn't just shifting underneath us anymore. It is actively splitting into separate, heavily guarded continents.
The supply chain realities of localized GPU clusters will be a nightmare, but the legal mandates will not care about the friction. You will have to compute locally, or you will not be allowed to compute at all.
And if you haven't inverted your architecture to handle that reality today, your skyscraper is coming down tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining us on this Innovation Unpacked deep dive. We invite you to look closely at your own data pipelines, interrogate your centralized assumptions, and ask yourself what is truly structurally sound. Until next time.